Hey friends, it's Mary Rose here. It's so nice to be here on a Wednesday. I was just having a little dance party here in my house to that music. It was good. It was making me feel loose, making me feel like I was in the flow. It was making me feel like I wasn't stuck at all. And that's our subject today, being stuck. I've got a lot to say about this, and you can think of it as the Mercury retrograde episode of the weekly live stream. So before we get into it, let me just remind anyone who's watching on Facebook, you can go to streamyard.com/Facebook and get permission to show your name, and I hope you will. And let me open up the comment box because I can see that I have a little gang here watching. They are not stuck. They're ready. They're loose. They're gonna open their minds and have a little fun with me today. Chris, hi. I'm waving hello to you. I see you've already posted a comment. Cynthia, wonderful to see you. It's always great to see my Path of the Storyteller fam here. And it just goes to show, even people who've been through the Path of the Storyteller program, who are in the training, who've done the training, it's not like a one-off. It's not like we get information handed to us and we get it and we no longer need to work on our writing craft or practice or think about it at all. It's just ongoing. It's like anything that involves mastery. We can absorb stuff at a certain level, at a certain stage of our experience, and then the more we become fluent, the more we put that training into action, we spiral up, and we keep revisiting the same ideas and topics from different vantage points, different levels of understanding. And so I love it when my students are here because I know that they're just like sponges. They know that there's always more to learn. So bravo to you all. If there's a little rustling coming through the mic, I don't know if you can hear it, but that's my cat Ralph, who is an occasional guest star on these live streams, and he's got hold of his catnip toy and it crinkles when he touches it, and so he's about to lose his mind. So just know we could have some feline excitement today, but hey, that's the good part of being live. I've introduced my cat Ralph, but let me introduce myself for those of you who might not know me. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author. I'm best known for writing middle grade fiction, which to me is just such a wonderful art form. It's the kind of book that can be read by someone who's rather young, but it's not just for the young, is it? We all sort of love our middle grade books as we go throughout life. I think some of my all-time favorite books are middle grade, and I didn't really get them till I was a grown-up. So some of you might be writing middle grade, YA, or adult. Everything we talk about on this live stream, it pertains. Writing craft pertains broadly to all of us, no matter what we're doing. So a moment ago, I said that we can think about this as the Mercury retrograde episode of the weekly live stream. Now, listen, I'm not going to try to convince anyone to believe in astrology if you don't believe in astrology. I don't even know if I believe in astrology, but I do love me a good symbolic language because I'm a writer and I love thinking in symbols and I love deriving meaning from symbols. And what are the signs of the zodiac if not an incredible story, an incredible collection of symbols to describe things? So right now, this is the beginning of October. It's one of those times when everyone's going, oh, it's Mercury retrograde. That's why XYZ. For those of you who are uninitiated, the symbolic meaning of the planet Mercury, or the mythic figure or archetype of Mercury being retrograde, having an apparent reverse motion, is that it is hard to make forward progress. We try and we just keep getting set back on our heels. We do things and we have to do them again. We schedule things and we have to reschedule them. We buy things and we have to return them. That's the energy. That's the vibe of Mercury retrograde. I'm not going to say whether I think it's true or not, but I will observe that Facebook was down for 6 hours this week. And we all know that electronic and technological snafus are one of the common hallmarks that people say, oh, Mercury retrograde. Now, that little prefix re in retrograde is actually something that we writers should never be afraid of, because we live by revision. We live by the practice of going back over our work again and again. So we should never be afraid of having to go back, because revision is a kind of forward progress, even though it involves turning our attention to stuff we've already done, you see. So we can feel very proud of it. It's actually the only way that we move forward with our work is through careful revision. But having said that, there are times when our inability to make forward progress doesn't feel like I'm having fun revising. It feels like we're stuck. It feels like stuckness. That's a very different energy, right? And that's what I want to talk about today, because it's a very common feeling among writers. We actually have our own terminology for it, and meaning writer's block, which I want to discuss in a minute. Whether it exists or not, I have my opinions, and I'm sure you have yours. But this idea of stuckness, I would like to divide into two categories. And I call them the not writing stuck and the writing stuck. They're both stuck. They're both the experience that we are not making the kind of forward progress that we want to be making. But they look different. They have different causes, and they may have slightly different solutions. So that's what I want to talk about today. Before I dive in, just a reminder, if you're here live, I really welcome your comments and questions, and will do my best to get to them before we wrap up. We usually go for about an hour, so you can expect us to be here until around 2 p.m. Pacific. So you've got lots of time to formulate and post questions in the comments. I'm here live, I'm seeing them, and I can bring them up on screen and we can address them, all right? And if you're watching the replay, either on YouTube or on Facebook, you can just leave comments below the video and I'll see them and I will answer them there. All right. So let's keep this community talking. You know, it's really great to connect. It really helps me know what you guys are getting from this content and how we can continue to talk about topics that really interest you. Are you ready to move forward? Shall we make some forward progress into our topic? I think we should. All right. I said there were two kinds of stuckness: the not writing stuckness and the writing stuckness. So let's talk about the first kind here. Not writing stuck. Now, this is self-evident that in the sense that if you're not writing and you wish you were, that is certainly a lack of forward progress. So that not writing kind of stuckness is what many writers think of as writer's block. I don't like the term writer's block, and I don't really believe in the idea of writer's block. I have my own way of talking about it. In my Path of the Storyteller program, we call that not writing stuckness falling off the pony. You've fallen off your writing pony. You're not on your pony at the moment. You're out of the saddle. You're not in the riding saddle. Your pony is not gone. It's just scampering around the meadow, you know, stretching its legs, having a little break. But you're not on it right now. You were on it, and now you've fallen off of it. I feel personally that that's a much more friendly way of thinking about not writing than this idea of being blocked, right? I mean, that just sounds so aggressive, so harsh, and importantly, so external. It's as if we're trudging along on our difficult path and a wall appears in front of us, and now we're blocked. We don't know what happened. We don't know why we deserve it. We don't know how to get around it, right? It puts us in this kind of passive position, this victimized state, if you will. It's a thing that happens to us. None of that is true. And this is why we have to be careful what words we use to talk to ourselves about our writing, about our process. Because if you say, oh, I'm blocked, well, what can we do but wish you good luck? Call the writing block doctor and hope that there's a cure. But if you say, oh, I've slipped off my writing pony, it's different, right? It just means that you were having fun, you were trotting along, and now you've slipped off, which is inevitable, right? Because the pony is not perfectly under your control. It is basically under your control, but it's not perfectly under your control 100% of the time. And at the moment, it's having a bit of a gallop. It's having a jaunt without you. All right. It's not gone. It's fine. You're fine. The pony's fine. The meadow is beautiful. You've just fallen off temporarily. Okay. So right away, hopefully that kind of lightens the energy around the feeling of not writing. Now, still, there's an old adage that when you fall off a horse, you got to get right back on. And that too sounds very forced. Like, but what if I'm afraid? What if the horse is having a tantrum? What if I broke my leg? Like, it's not always the right advice, is it, to get right back on a horse? Again, we have to be careful. If you've slipped off your pony, and by that I mean that you've stopped writing and you've noticed that you've stopped writing, and it may take time to notice, because it's one of those things. It's a slippery slope, isn't it? Oh, I'll skip today because I have a meeting. Well, I can't get to it this weekend because there's that deadline, or there's that birthday party, or whatever, their family gathering that I have to clean the house. And oh, well, now 2 weeks have slipped by, and it's like, well, we're having company, or whatever it is, right? A week turns to 2 weeks, turns to a month. And after a little while, you may look up and say, I haven't written for 6 weeks. I haven't written for 8 weeks. What happened? So it may take a little time for you to realize it. And that's the point at which you have to say, okay, I've slipped off my pony. Clearly, this is a thing that happens to one and all. You have to ask yourself, why? Why did it happen? And there will be reasons that you give yourself, but let's not settle for the superficial reasons. Let's look a little deeper. If you say you got too busy, I got too busy, it's possible that you did get too busy. That's okay. The pony cannot gallop without breaks. It needs to stop and rest. It needs to be fed. It's perfectly fine to take breaks from your riding. In fact, sometimes it's a really good idea. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But if the idea that you got too busy is always the excuse, then obviously that's not the reason, right? And so the alternative to that is that you ceased to make it a priority. You were doing things all of those days that you were too busy to write. You found time to do all the things that you were busy with. You just didn't make writing high enough on the list to actually get on the calendar for the day. So you have to ask yourself, why did I cease making my writing a priority? That's a different sort of question, isn't it? Invites a different sort of answer. Why did you cease to make your writing a priority? One of the reasons that can happen is that you lose faith in yourself and or in the thing that you're writing. It's hard to stay motivated if you don't have a strong sense of why you're doing what you're doing. And if you have a lot of external motivations for your writing practice, oh, I'm doing this because I said that I would, or I think I'm going to sell this book and make a fortune, or it's been my lifelong dream to finish a book, or whatever it is, you have to look at it, whether it's result oriented in a way that's not really that motivating, right? Because in a sense, who cares? Like, the result is going to be the result, and so many of the results that we pin our hopes and dreams on, we don't have that much control over. So if your only reason for slogging through the admittedly quite complex craft, the slow process of assembling a novel, if your only reason for doing it is the finish line, that's a long time to keep fanning your motivation without any validation during the process. And if you're creating this kind of vision that involves a lot of validation at the far end, you're setting yourself up for being validated or not validated in ways that you can't control and that give you no energy during the journey, during the process. So you have to keep faith in yourself on a daily practice level. You have to have reasons for each day to include writing, for each week to include writing if you're not an everyday writer. And few of us are, I have to say. It's a gold standard that's sometimes bandied about, like real writers write every day. Nonsense, of course. This is nonsense. Real writers write it consistently and in a way that allows them to make forward progress. And life often means that we take days off, and that's totally fine. So if you don't have enough faith in yourself to say, well, my writing is part of my daily practice because I have faith in myself, not that I have faith in myself that if I get it to the finish line, I'm going to sell it and have a big book deal. That's not what I mean by faith. And it's not even what I mean by self. That's all external. On the daily, do you have enough of a attachment to your own accurate identity, your own sense of self to say, no, I'm a creative person. I love to create. I love to tell stories. I love to spend time every day in my creative zone. I love that flow. It feels so good. I get pleasure from coming up with a new idea, even one new idea, even one shapely sentence, even one interesting character trait, even whatever I invent today gives me such pleasure. And that's the kind of faith in myself that I have. I know myself. I believe that in my creativity as part of myself, my core identity. And if you feel that way, then you can sit down to work and write without the heaviness of having to justify the time and energy spent by a distant goalpost that is totally out of your control. Many of us enjoy taking a walk. I love to take a walk. I'm very fortunate at this moment in my life. I happen to live near enough to a beach that I can walk to a beach. I don't need anyone to give me a contract and an advance to motivate me to walk to the beach. I like to go because it's lovely. It makes me feel good. I don't need to be entered into a marathon that I'm training for in order to enjoy the process of taking a walk. It's not part of a larger objective. The walk is just being present. It's having faith in my capacity to be in the moment, to just enjoy life, to appreciate nature, to appreciate the beauty of the ocean, the sunset, the salt there, the sensory gifts of being alive. That's it. I believe in myself. I exist. I have this wonderful exchange with experience on the daily. Can you make your writing feel like that and not like, I entered a race and it's really hard and I have to win or none of it's going to be worth it. So that's why I have to go for my walk every day because I'm training. I think so many of us approach our writing in this latter way. And if we have that going on the inside, it's just inevitable that we are going to fail to make our writing a priority because it just doesn't make us feel good. Why would we punish ourselves by saying, I have all these things that make me feel good, but I'm not going to do them because I'm going to make myself right. I'm going to be all clenched and white knuckled and force myself to write when I'm not letting it give me the joy that it could be giving me every day. So that's what I mean. I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit of self-exploration. It's an invitation to do a little self-exploration on the things that give you joy, and just to make sure that you have let your writing practice be one of them. If you can do that, you're not going to be too busy to do it. You're not going to be too busy to do it. Now, having said that, I mentioned that there are times where we are too busy, right? There are seasons of life that are consuming. If you have a new baby, if you're, in the middle of moving from one house to another, if you are in graduate school and your dissertation is due and all your, energy is directed toward some kind of scholarly pursuit, and you've got your creative thing on the side. I mean, all the things that can come up. It's perfectly fine to take a break from your creative practice. You can take a little writing vacation, You can say, I'm not doing this right now. You can own the fact that I'm not doing this right now. And that too is a very different experience than saying, oh, I know I should be writing, but I'm just not. I'm on a vacation from writing. I'm taking a month off. I've chosen to take a month off. But here's the thing about taking a vacation, right? We embrace it. We say that we're taking a vacation and this feels good. And everyone goes, yay, that's so great. Where are you going? What are you doing? I'm so jealous. I wish I could take a vacation too. All of a sudden, it's a joyful thing. But we have to know when we have to come back to work, when we set a vacation. So one of the little tips that I want to give you on how to fix this non-writing stuckness is to set a date, to call it a vacation, to own it, but to set a date when you are going to get back to work. Don't make it an open-ended, well, when I feel like it, or when life gets less busy. Set a date to get back to work. Now, what if life is super busy? What if you've let your calendar get out of control? So this is just like basic time management advice. And then some of you might need this. I have a feeling a lot of you are already good time managers. But if not, the only way that you can create more space in your daily calendar, you can't add hours, alas. You can't shove more hours, and you've only got the same amount of hours as everybody else does. It's a very level playing field. You can look at the things you're doing and you can prioritize them differently. You can look at the things you're doing and you can remove some of them. You can just delete some of them. You may be doing things during the day that you don't need to be doing, that are just a waste of time. Did I mention that Facebook was down for 6 hours the other day? How many walks were taken? How much poetry was written during those 6 hours? How many homemade meals were prepared, pots of soup put on to boil? Can you just imagine the glories that went on during that magical 6 hours? I use that as an example, but you know that there are things you do with your time that are just not important, and you do them out of habit, and you can just stop doing them and capture all of that time back for yourself. So you can absolutely delete things off your calendar. And you can also delegate things. And that's for those of you who may be doing a lot of stuff for other people that they are capable of doing for themselves. I don't know who needed to hear that today, but I said it, and I'm not sorry that I said it. Many of us have caregiving responsibilities, right, at various points in our lives. And they are valid and they are real. But there's a fine line between caregiving responsibilities and making yourself indispensable to people who can do for themselves, and who, frankly, I don't know who needs to hear this today, but I'm going to say it. People who are, frankly, a little irritated that you feel like it's still your job to do this and do that and supervise this and check on that. They may not want your help. They may not want your help. So consider it. Consider that. So you can prune away the things that are not serving you out of your schedule, and voila, there will be more time. So for those of you who really are feeling like, no, Mary Rose, you don't understand. This isn't some kind of woo-woo, have faith in myself, find the moment. Where's the joy? I'm just too busy. I'm like, okay, listen, that's valid. Look at your calendar. Is everything you're doing on there more important than your writing? You know. Now, when do we actually need that vacation that I mentioned? I'll tell you one really good time to take one of those vacations. If you finished a piece, if you've just finished something, I think it's an extremely normal and healthy impulse to say, I have been working for a year and a half on this manuscript and I just typed the end and I'm going to take a break. I'm going to look up from my, laptop. I'm going to say hello to Mother Nature. I'm going to call friends and family that haven't heard from me often enough lately. I'm going to take some yoga classes. I'm going to, scrapbook my photos and declutter my closets. I'm going to turn back to the minutia of daily life, because those of us who work on long forms, if we write novels, we spend a long time with these novels. And it's an inevitable feeling that we've turned away from real life to a little bit of an extent, sometimes to a greater extent than others. If you've in a situation where you've got a tight deadline, you may be like, don't talk to me for a month. I'm on deadline. I'm going away. If you finish a project and you have the opportunity to take a little holiday, do it, and do it with a feeling of confidence. Just take it. Let it refresh yourself. Your pony is still galloping around the meadow. You're not going to forget how to write. It's all going to be okay. Another technique for those of you who've fallen off the pony, so we're still talking about the not writing kind of stuck, and you want to get back on the pony, but it's just really triggering a lot of resistance, a lot of anxiety, is to create a mini practice. And what I mean by a mini practice is to just make a little deal with yourself saying, okay, I've done what Mary Rose said. I'm calling it a vacation. I'm owning it. I'm letting myself be rejuvenated by it. I'm going to motivate myself intrinsically with just the joy of the process of the day's work. I'm not going to focus on far away goalposts that just make me feel anxious and unworthy. But I'm not ready to start a new book, or I'm not ready to get back to the book. That just makes me feel shaky when I think about it. Create a mini practice. Don't say I'm going to write something new every day. Say every day I'm going to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes rereading my draft, making notes, just seeing what I think of it. Or maybe I'll just brainstorm, or maybe I'll journal about what I'm reading, or just something that is about you and your creative energy. There's a wonderful technique in Julia Cameron's book, The Artist Way, that she calls the artist date, to take yourself on an artist date. I'm such a big fan of this. Have you been to the art museum lately? Have you gone to the theater? Have you been to the opera? Did you, take up watercolor painting yourself? Did you do some incredible knitting or crocheting? Like, have you been at play in the realm of creativity in a special way? Something that you really can say, no, this is an artist date. This is me going out into the world outside of myself and just reveling in how much creative energy there is in the world. Other people are doing fabulous work, and it inspires me, and I'm part of that tradition too. Go to the ballet. Just do something that you think you might not even enjoy. Listen to a different type of music. Go to a live concert without even knowing what it is. Shake it up, expand your sense of self, and just remember to situate yourself in that continuous flow of creative energy. That's the beauty of an artist day. All right, so those are some tips for you guys who might have fallen off the writing pony completely. Look at your calendars, evaluate your motives, set a back to work date if you're taking a conscious vacation, and start with a little mini practice that may not involve a full-on commitment to, writing a chapter this week. Just lighten it up a little bit. Just remember, it's your practice. It's always your practice. You have to manage it. You get to make it work however it works for you. All right. So that's the not writing stuck. The non-existent writer's block. What about writing stuckness? What about the feeling of stuckness that hits us when we are in fact writing? When we're writing diligently, when we're writing consistently? Maybe we've been working on a particular book for a long time. How is that stuck, you say? Oh, my friends, I think you know what I mean. When you're sitting down day after day after day to work on something, and you're making yourself go through the motions, and words are coming out, and pages are getting written, or pages are getting revised, but the part of you that knows the truth is saying, yeah, but this isn't going anywhere. I'm spinning my wheels here. I'm just going in circles. I've revised this chapter 5 times, and I think it's worse. It's definitely not getting any better. And I don't even know why. I don't know what the problem is. So these are the symptoms of a kind of a writing stuckness. One of them would be this sort of endless revision with the sinking feeling, the sinking realization that you're not making things better. You're just making them different. That is a very daunting kind of stuckness. There's another kind of writing stuckness where you keep writing and you keep drafting new things, and the story keeps getting bigger. It keeps wandering. It keeps incorporating new stuff, new ideas, new plot threads, new characters. It just keeps getting bigger. It's like suffering from a kind of bloat. And instead of feeling like you're getting closer to the end, you start to feel like the more you write, the further from the end you're getting. The more side directions you seem to have opened up. There are more side doors that seem to be swinging open. The thing is just getting unwieldy. It's getting bigger and bigger. And even though there is progress being made, it would be hard to call this forward progress, because in fact, the part of you that knows the truth knows that this is not getting you any closer to the finished book. So this is a kind of stuckness. I would be really interested to hear, those of you who are watching live, if either one or both of these kinds of stuckness feels like you've been down this road, if it feels familiar to you. I want to talk about this writing stuckness because in a way it's a little bit more insidious. I can give you a little pep talk about getting back on the pony, starting small, looking at your calendar, setting a date. It's not hard to fix those kinds of things. Because what's underneath them all is that core belief that this is not just a part of your life that deserves to be there, but like one of the high points, one of the joys of life. Who would not put the joys of a life, at the top of their to-do list? It's easier to fix. This writing stuckness is tough, right? Because we're doing it. But we're not getting anywhere. It is truly that symbolic message of Mercury retrograde. We're all of a sudden, like, we're pushing a boulder up a hill, and the hill just gets steeper and the boulder gets bigger. We're pushing as hard as we can, but all of a sudden we're not getting further up the hill. We're trying not to get crushed by the boulder. It's a different feeling. It's a more oppressive feeling, this writing stuckness. So let me ask you a few questions that you can use to interrogate this painful condition. You have to ask yourself, first of all, are you actually avoiding finishing the work that you're on? Now, I realize that's a provocative question, because we all say, oh boy, if only I could get to the end. If only I could get to the end. I wish I could finish the draft. But it's complicated, isn't it, to end something that we've put a lot of work into? It's complicated to get to the end. Just the same way it's complicated to begin when we have an idea, right? When we have an idea, it's perfect, it's filled with potential, right? It's like an imaginary child. Like it's got every attribute you could wish. It's got every quality, right, that you would want. But as soon as the imaginary starts to become real, it's just like, oh, it's just a sloppy first draft. Okay, well, then you have to deal with your feelings about, no, no, I'm just slogging away the sloppy first draft. When you get to the end, the sense of like, that's it, that's what I worked so hard on, can really be challenging if you are prone to self-judgment. If you get easily triggered into the zone of, but this isn't any good. I'm not satisfied with what I did. If that's one of your forces of resistance, if that's one of the little gremlins that visits you often, actually finishing something means that, no, I did it. This is it. This is what I got. it it invites an evaluation because it's done. It invites a sense of that. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing totally, because you have to be discerning about your own work. Otherwise, you won't know how to revise it. But it's a complicated moment. And as long as we're in the middle and it's unfinished and we're just inventing, we've postponed measuring our the outcome. We've postponed, deciding whether we did a good job, whether it was worth the time and energy. It's like, if you, again, I use the marathon thing. If you start a marathon, like, you might imagine, oh, I'm going to finish in, under 3 hours. Like, well, no, you're not. The possibility exists at the very beginning of the race if you're a really, high-end world-class marathoner. But the truth is, when you reach the finish line, your time is going to be your time. That's what you really did. And so the hopes and the dreams and the fantasies of what you're capable of doing versus, no, that's what I really did, come home to roost a little bit at the finish line. So I just want to encourage you to ask yourself, do I have any reluctance to actually finish? Is there something about actually finishing that's making me saying, before I actually get to the end, let me add another detour. Let me go down yet another rabbit hole and add another subplot. It's hard to say goodbye to our characters. That can be another thing. And anybody who's been through the experience of finishing a book knows that it's like, oh, goodbye. They were my imaginary friends every day for all this time. And now I have to say goodbye. This is often something that we feel very keenly when we've been writing a series. Nobody wants them to end. Everybody wants to know what happens at the end, afterwards. But how did they all grow up? What happened years down the line? Will there be another? It can be hard to say goodbye to characters. So that is also something that can keep us from, rushing pell-mell confidently toward the end. That may or may not resonate with some of you. Here's something, however, that I do hear a lot of. Boy, do I hear a lot of this. People are so afraid of the publishing industry. They're so afraid of it. It has become such a commonplace that the publishing industry is just out to get writers. And it really isn't. The publishing industry doesn't exist without writers. And so one of the things that happens when you get closer to finishing a book is that you may start to think, well, what am I going to do with this? What's going to happen next? Am I going to have to write query letters? Am I going to have to look for an agent? Am I going to have to learn how to indie publish? Like, what's going to happen? There's a whole other world, right? There's a whole other journey on the other side of the end. And for many writers, it's very triggering. It's very fraught with a sense of entering piranha-infested waters, or doing the things that we don't like to do. Or, I love to write, but I don't want to promote my books. I don't want to, have to go and talk to people about them. I don't want to have to be a public figure. Sometimes writers imagine all these elaborate reasons. It's like, wait a minute, you'll cross that bridge when you come to it. Don't let your fear of giving your award acceptance speech prevent you from finishing a first draft. I'm laughing because it's so silly, but isn't this the way our minds work? It's so human. We all do these things. So those are the kinds of fears of like what lies on the other side of the end that shockingly can start to weigh us down even when we're in the middle. Here's another one. Are you trying to make this book, this book that refuses to head toward the end, that you've been working on and you're working on and working on, and yet somehow it just refuses to, land the plane, right? Are you trying to make this book all your books? What do I mean by that? Are you trying to put every impulse you have creatively, every idea you have into this book? Has it become a repository for all of your creative impulses? This is a thing that can happen, And if that is what's going on, just remember that this is one book, and then you're going to write another, and then you're going to write another, and then you're going to write another. Those books will have lots of space in them for the ideas that you have, the creative energies that you have that are pertinent to those books. But just because you're having an idea now doesn't necessarily mean that you need to cram it into this book, And this is why we keep a little trunk, a notebook, a vault, if you will, of ideas for future books. Any working writer that I know has like a list. They're like, after these are the books that I'd like to write someday. They've probably got a half a dozen or more books on that list, and they may not know much about them except that I always wanted to write a book, set in South America. I always wanted to write a book that had to do with a treasure hunt. I always wanted to write a caper. It just may be very loose ideas, or they may be more fully developed. But people have them. People know what they're going to write well into the future, even in a kind of a vague way. So don't feel that every idea you have goes into this book, that it's make or break. That can be another reason that one particular book becomes unwieldy. All right. Now, here's the biggie. Here's the biggie about being writing stuck. Let me recap before I get to the biggie. So we're talking about what it means to be stuck, but in an active process of writing. You're revising stuff, but it's not getting any better. You keep adding to the book, but you're not getting any closer to the end. You're just in a kind of an endless loop of working on a book, but you realize that you're not making forward progress at all. So we've talked about being afraid of finishing, being afraid of having to face the judgment, either internally, personal judgment, or the external judgment of the industry, saying goodbye to your characters, of figuring out what to do with it in terms of publishing, and also the impulse to cram every idea that you're having into this one book. All right, that's what we've talked about. Quick recap. Here's the biggie. And I say this with great affection and respect for everyone, no matter where you are on your journey as a writer. Is it possible that you have simply hit the limits of your current level of writing craft and story structure craft? That you have gotten to the point in the book where you don't know how to do the thing that is required of you to make forward progress? This may be the case. This is often the case with writers who haven't had a ton of experience or a ton of good training. They don't know how to write second act. They just haven't been taught how to do it. They just don't know how to do it. And so they get into their book and they kind of, improvise their way through something that feels like a pretty good beginning. And now they're in the middle, but they actually don't know how to write a middle. They don't have a framework. They don't have a technique for how to do it. And so they're just treading water. They're putting words on the page because they don't want to quit, but they literally don't know how to do it. They don't know what it's for. They don't have clear goals about it. But they won't stop writing, and they just keep going. They don't know how to land the plane. They know how to fly the plane, but they don't know how to land it. They don't know what happens in a second act that actually brings it to a kind of a climactic moment that then flips over into a third act, which is a satisfying ending where all of our readers' expectations are going to not only be fulfilled, but fulfilled in a way that feels surprising and 10x'd, like bigger and more impactful than they had even hoped and dreamed. It's going to be a very satisfying ending if we know what we're doing. You don't know how to do it. No one showed you how. You haven't acquired it along the way. This is really, really common, and it's one of the reasons that I foreground story structure so often in my talks about writing, in the way I work with my students in the Path of the Storyteller program, in my own writing practice. Believe me, I don't tell you guys to do anything or try anything that I'm not actively working with myself. These are not theoretical. These are not ways to critique, books that are on the shelf. These are practices that you're supposed to use in your writing. This is stuff that you should be doing, putting into use. And so is that possible, that you've just hit a piece of the structure that you just don't know how to navigate? Maybe you don't even know what to call it. Second acts are notorious for being the swamp from which many a writer has failed to return, right? They're notorious for it because they do have a lot of structure in them, but it's not self-evident to the writer who's taught themselves to write by ear, by which I mean they've taught themselves to write by reading a lot. The structures of second acts are not self-evident. They're really not self-evident. Often no structure in a well-written book is self-evident sometimes to a writer who's just reading for enjoyment. But second acts are particularly perilous. And so that's often the case. But sometimes a writer who doesn't have a grasp of story structure is going to get to the kind of end of a second act, but then they don't know how it ends. They just don't know what the ending should be. And so they just keep, sort of teasing out more adventures, more second act complications. They just keep elaborating on what they've already done because they're not clear on how a third act is so different than a second act. They think, oh, there's a character and then there's a kind of a plot problem or situation or conflict or whatever terminology they use, and then they have to solve it. But that's not enough, right? It's not really enough to tie this over a novel length work. We need a much more detailed and refined framework than that. And so they just keep writing around the gaps in their knowledge. And so they don't know how to get to the end. That's the big one. And for the writer who's writing stuck in a revision mode, I want to say that it can be the same thing, right? Because they keep just trying different versions of the same incomplete framework for a scene. And so they've got an idea for a section of the book, and they've written it, and they don't like it. It doesn't quite work. And so, but they don't have the framework. They don't have a new framework to use. They just do another version of the scene that uses the same framework that doesn't quite stand up. The architecture is not quite good enough. And so they do it again and again and again. It's very frustrating for the writer, and this is why I love writers so much, because we work so hard, It's tough work. We have to sit still and think. We have to really think, it's very tiring. It's very tiring. So here's the summation. If you think that you actually are stuck in writing mode, you're not making progress, but you're busy. You're busy not making progress. And you suspect, even though you wish it weren't so, that you may just have hit the limits of what you know how to do. The fix is self-evident, but not always so easy to implement. But you have to study. You have to be humble, and you have to recognize that there's more to this than is evident just by reading books that you like. That you can no more teach yourself the architecture of story, than you can teach yourself how to build a bridge that is going to hold up by driving over it. You have to look underneath. You have to look at beyond what's visible. Now, there are so many resources for you to study. I'm here every week doing like an hour-long lecture about all kinds of subjects having to do with story structure and writing craft. There are tons of books out there with all kinds of frameworks for how to structure a narrative. Many of them will feel like they have certain elements in common. Many of them will contradict each other, but there's a lot for you to explore, and you can just keep looking. You can get with a mentor, you can get in a program, you can take a class, you can get a degree. I mean, there's all kinds of ways for you to level up what you're doing. But here's the tricky bit. You can't just put good writing craft on top of bad writing craft and expect it to help you. Well, let me clarify what I mean by this. Anytime you decide that what you really need to do is to gain more expertise in the nuts and bolts of how to write good fiction, and you go out and you read a book, you take a class, you watch a video, whatever it is, there's tons of resources available to you. Resist the impulse to say, okay, well, I don't agree with 80% of this, but this piece of it is interesting. And this piece kind of validates what I'm already doing. So I'm just going to just maybe play with them a little bit and try them out, It's not going to help you if you are unwilling to really change what you have, to really unravel your way of thinking about the work. It's not going to help you to just kind of like sprinkles on a cupcake, to just sprinkle new approaches to writing on top. And I say this again, not to be, not to make anyone feel like, oh, is she talking to me? Like, no, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm talking to everybody. It's extremely hard to learn a new way of doing something that feels as organic to us as language. The way we think, the way we speak, these feel like our personalities. They feel like our identities, our consciousness. But writing fiction is actually a really complicated craft, It has more to do with like playing the violin really well than it has to do with talking. It's artificial. To write things that are going to please the reader and be coherent, it really takes quite a lot of technique. And so you have to be willing to let it be artificial, to let it be uncomfortable, to let go of what feels natural to you. What you've been doing by ear may very well need to change drastically in order for you to start writing with good technique. You have to lay down the imperfect technique to start working with a better technique. You can't just sit the new on top of the old. I hope that makes sense. But what I hear and what I'm really responding to is my experience of writers who've spent a lot of time and effort studying. They've got every book about writing craft on the shelves. They've really got a lot of it. And then now they're frustrated, right? Because they feel that they've made all the efforts to have a high level of craft, but the work is still not working. But did they do any of the things in all of those books? Did they actually try to sort of wipe the slate clean and build a new way of working from the ground up? Did they? Or did they read them and then go sit down to work and do it more or less the way they've been doing it all along? Now, I'm a human being and I have the full complement of human foibles. And I just can speak from my own experience of all the times in my life that I bought a book, I bought a course, I was inspired to try something, and the follow through is really difficult. It's very uncomfortable. It takes a kind of deep commitment. So I know from my own experience just how what a long and winding road it can be to actually be willing to say, no, what I'm doing isn't working. It's not working. I have to do something different. And I have to stop doing what I'm doing first so that I can do something different. In between, it's like this trapeze act in the circus, right? You let go of the trapeze on one side of the tent, and then you are flying through the air with nothing in your hands until you grab what's on the other side. And for most of us who are not trapeze artists, we look at that and we think, oh my gosh. I mean, what an act of trust, what an act of skill. You know, it just seems so perilous. How could one ever learn to do that? What would it be like the first time you let go on one side with the hope and the prayer that I hope that swings on the other side to catch me. That moment when you've got nothing is the scary part. That's the part where the whole audience in the big top goes, right? But when we want to learn something new, that's exactly what we have to do. We're actually sort of letting go of an old way of doing things because we want to master a new way of doing things. But the new way of doing things, we're not going to be good at for a while. It's going to take a lot of practice. And so in that in-between time, we got nothing. We don't have the old way. We don't have the new way. It's very perilous. And this is why learning is such courageous work. This is why change is hard. This is why we love stories, because what are stories? They are depictions of the process of transformation. Over and over and over again, we see our hero go through exactly this kind of transformation. In stories, we compress it. We turn up the dials of the stakes. You know, we put our heroes through things we would never want to go through in real life. But I'm not talking about our heroes right now. I'm talking about you, the writer, that you too have to be brave enough to go on a bit of a hero's journey when you want to level up what you're doing. You want to get unstuck. If you feel that the stuckness is an invitation to adventure, to really try a different way of working, you are going to have to be brave and try something new. Don't be afraid to try something new. Okay. So that is my Mercury retrograde inspired talk about what it means to be stuck as a writer, whether you're stuck not writing or you're stuck in the writing process. I hope this talk has been of interest to those of you who are watching. I thank those of you who are here live. I so appreciate you coming. If anybody's got any comments or questions, now's the time to throw them in. For the rest of you, if you're watching on YouTube, I do invite you to subscribe to the channel. I'm excited to grow this channel and to be a place where anybody who wants a kind of talk about writing that digs a little deeper, right, than the average bear can find a place to come, you get mentored, hang out with some other writers who have the same level of ambition and curiosity about this process. So please subscribe to the channel. It would be great to have you as a subscriber. And I'm here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific. I would love to hear from you about topics that you want to talk about in the future. So please feel free to chat with me in the comments. Until the next time I see you, it'll still be Mercury retrograde for another week or two. I hope that things move forward for you in the right way, in the right time. And if it's more of a time that you want to revisit, reschedule, revise, and rethink, this is a very fruitful time to do it. Happy writing to you all, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.